Hello, everybody, and welcome to Queer Talk. Queer Talk is a podcast by Fighting Fear. Fighting Fear is a community by queer people by queer people. You can find out more about us on our website, fightingfear.co.uk, and you can follow us on all major social media handles, Fighting Fear Community. So today we have a very special guest all the way from Pakistan. So with no further ado, I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, Saqib. And to everybody watching, hi, my name is Mehrub. I am from Pakistan. I am 34 years old. I'm from the north, from the mountains. I'm very proud of my heritage. And I have an MD, that's I'm a doctor of medicine, and I have a master's in global health policy. And I'm also a politician. And I think that's kind of cool to have a young trans politician in Pakistan.
Exactly.
Although 34 isn't young. 34 isn't young. Look at me. Young trans politician. I'm 34. I'm young. Wow.
Life begins in your 30s, huh? That's the way I think about it.
True. True that, yeah. 20s is just confusing.
Exactly. I think we're undoing so much at that point, especially as queer people. We're undoing most of the damage in our 20s, or at least dealing with it. And then 30s is when hopefully life begins. So just with that point, you are in Pakistan and you are a politician. And you are a trans woman. I loved your article that I read recently, and I just want to read a quote from it. And you know the quote I'm going to read. So I'm going to read a quote from there. These degenerates will urinate and defecate in the same toilet seats as poor Muslim nurses, and they will destroy our Muslim family system. I love that line, by the way. It's absolutely brilliant. When I read that, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Let's give it some context. So this is a article that you wrote. And obviously it's a satire piece. Yeah. Tell us in what context that you wrote this article. What was the whole premise of it?
I always say if the world is a high school, then Pakistan is going to be that alternative queer kid in the high school. Misunderstood, messy, proud in their own way. And the way Pakistan has been presented to the outer world post 9/11 and even pre 9/11 has been from an Oriental gaze. The Oriental gaze always otherizes the global South, but in particularly, they do so with countries that are predominantly Muslim. And we cannot deny that there is anti-Muslim bigotry and Islamophobia baked into the very foundations of modern civilizational states. Because a lot of the times when they were colonizing states that had Muslim majority populations, an ambition behind that colonization was to Christianize and to civilize them. In response to that, we developed Muslim orthodoxies of our own, which predominantly mirrored the colonial empire and the colonial empire's playbook. So it's fascinating how you have the matter and antimatter both existing at the same time, but the antimatter, the Muslim orthodoxies that have been given birth, aren't necessarily authentic in representing the populations that they serve. Case in point, when the British were colonizing South Asia, they criminalized transgender people and transgender people's existence simply because transgender people, as Hajasaras, held a very high position in the South Asian society, and they were seen as a blight.
And I love this point because actually it's so evident when you look at South Asian culture, whether it's Pakistan, whether it's India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, that they're there. That this community is there, yet the animosity that exists locally on the ground would make you think that this is a new thing, something that is from the West. And as you said, I remember even in Bollywood films, but historically we know that they were in the palaces. They were the mediums between the male and the female courts.
Yeah.
But there were hakikas. There was one at my hakika. There was a hijra that was welcome. That was at my own hakika. Brought into hakikas, into funerals, into weddings to bless
Yeah.
So they're very much embedded in community. And I remember my grandmother specifically being very much telling me and exposing the family to trans community, specifically trans women, because the idea was their prayers are accepted more readily than mine or someone else's.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that very breath, as a transgender person, also as a transgender person who's part of the Khwaja Sara / Hijra system, so I'm not just a transgender woman. My genesis, my start comes from the Khwaja Sara community. And then also as somebody born with an intersex condition with partial androgen insensitivity syndrome, I have lived many lives. And hence I have encountered many different barricades. So the paradoxes and the anomalies between those barricades and how I answer them prompted me to examine how my nation and my country is being represented abroad, which gave birth to that article that if I, in my current reality, have to sit down and introduce Pakistan to the world, how am I going to introduce that Pakistan to the world? How do I balance the light with the dark? And I thought sarcasm was the best medium. I think sarcasm is also something that flows from me naturally. It's something that I've been trying to tame a lot ever since I entered politics.
I think it's very much part of the queer community. I think that's...
Yeah, and then I'm going to sit down and I'm like, okay, girl, just write. Stop. Yeah,
you describe
right.
Pakistan as the paradoxical republic in this article. And you talked about your own personal navigation and of these contradictions in your daily life as a trans woman. But could you talk about queer people more broadly? How do you think queer people more broadly sit within the paradoxical republic?
I think there is no understanding of Pakistan that is going to be complete unless it simultaneously is a class analysis of the country. Pakistan is a country that is divided along class lines, like many other countries. There's absolutely no denying that. And I think how sexuality and gender is experienced across class lines becomes markedly different. So, for instance, when we hear about women should not work, this is predominantly a middle class argument. It is not a working class or proletariat argument because working class women have to work. Otherwise, how do you put food on the table? So, when we talk about popular notions of misogyny are often also just class-based. They're just limited to one particular class. When you see transphobia, actual avid transphobia, that, trans women are men, this is an imported rhetoric. And imported rhetoric is only going to be accessible to individuals who are exposed to those cultures. So this is going to come from the upper income bracket, where they're going to sit down and parrot the talking points of Candace Evans or J.K. Rowling or individuals as such, because they find
Matt Walsh in your article. And I was
Matt Walsh was mentioned.
And it was surprising to me that someone like Matt Walsh would even be mentioned in the context of Pakistan, considering who he is.
Yeah. And yet, just like Scotland, when Pakistan's transgender protection rights bill was challenged in the federal Sharia court in 2020, 21, I guess 20, and the verdict came out in 23, it actually quotes Matt Walsh. Ironic, right? That an Islamophobic, far-right, Christian individual's quotation and remarks are being quoted by a Sharia court in an Islamic republic. And that is the beautiful confluence between Christian right-wing fundamentalism and Islamic right-wing fundamentalism across the world. They speak to each other, they co-inform each other, even though positing each other as their enemy. Their strategies and their tactics are quite similar and they're mutually co-informed. So the thinking behind the article in a summary was just my sort of love-hate letter to the world, mostly to Pakistan as well. It was quite well received, actually. I've read it in a few feminist forums as well. I still love Pakistan. It's interesting because when I talk about transgender rights in Pakistan, it's not an alien concept, even from within. I'm not introducing something that was introduced in another part of the world. It's more about unlearning the hatred that we've learned and then finding a way and a method to coexist. Because I think coexistence is the theme when it comes to Pakistan. We haven't urbanized or modernized that successfully and that fastly as other states, particularly the post-Enlightenment era European states. So that process is still undergoing. So to fast forward that isn't going to yield any good results. But to get to a message of peaceful coexistence and then figuring out what does this peaceful coexistence looks like, I think that is a nice middle ground to have, to fight for.
With that in mind, you mentioned socioeconomic status and differences which can influence and experience. I mean, I was just in Pakistan. I was there, I think 2 weeks ago. So I almost didn't make it out actually because of the war.
Because of India.
Yes. And for me, it was a very strange, actually. The whole experience was very strange because, yes, I'm Pakistani born, but I'm not Pakistani. Let's be honest, right? I don't have I have too many privileges to not have the Pakistani queer experience. So my experience of Pakistan is very different to perhaps many in Pakistan. Yet, I noticed among some of my peers who are of a particular socioeconomic demographic. Let's talk about the upper middle classes of Pakistan and maybe even higher. It's as though this is not even an issue. It's as though queerness is not a thing, or it's not the taboo that we would imagine it to be in the West. That was my experience, but I guess you tell me, what are your thoughts on that?
I would partially agree to that. And I would partially agree to that by saying that like I said earlier, I think the most fundamentalist and conservative income bracket, if we have to be certain, is going to be the middle income. And then you go lower middle, upper middle. I'm counting them all as the middle class. And this is not something that I'm pulling out of my hat right now. The middle class has been theorized upon, written about by Marxist scholars for the past 100 and 150 years. And we know that that is the truth. Theoretically speaking, the middle class is almost the fundamentalist one because they want to position themselves in opposition to the proletariat, to the non-bourgeoisie, by saying that, we are better than them because we pulled ourselves from our bootstraps and we've made life work for ourselves. We are not the poor people. We are not the low class. And then simultaneously, they try to position themselves as the anti-elite because the elite and the bourgeoisie is seen as the profligate, the one that indulges, the one that sins, the one that has excesses. So it carves itself a very comfortable little niche, which is ideologically superior, morally superior. And you will find this across the world, and Pakistan is no exception.
It's interesting, which is why because it almost feels like it is an exception in that sense, or at least in the Western perspective, at least anyway. Because when we think about Western right-wing narratives, let's take the UK for example. It really is a top-down issue rather than a middle up or a bottom up issue. Homophobia is really coming from the elites, studying in Cambridge, studying in Oxford, and then becoming the politicians of today. Those are the ones who are bringing homophobia. Those are the ones who are bringing transphobia. I mean, look at Keir Starmer's government today. It's under them that trans people are getting it worse. It wasn't under the Conservatives, and this is supposed to be the party of the working class. Yeah, but
I think in homophobia for sure, and I think also in transphobia, as I had mentioned earlier on, that when it came to transphobia in Pakistan, the working class never really has had an issue because trans women are working class in Pakistan. They live in working class neighborhoods, they live in slums, and as a result, everybody just gets along. Everybody knows that trans women live in this particular house, and that's just the reality of the world. For the middle class, it has kind of always been struggling really to make ends meet, and now it did. Now it finally has houses of its own, has jobs, have kids that have settled abroad. And these are kids that haven't been raised in elite neighborhoods or working class neighborhoods. They have been raised in neighborhoods that are quite middle income. And when they move abroad, there is also a lot of diaspora import of homophobia and transphobia into Pakistan. That's where Matt Walsh and Candace Evans come into play because people haven't really been looking at them. And when Pakistani people move to the UK, for example, that is the country that they move to in the biggest numbers. there is a culture shock. There is an identity crisis. You as a therapist can talk about it in much more detail than I can, because I'm only living it politically. You have experienced it as well. When they move there, I think conservatism, Islamic conservatism particularly, becomes a very good home for them. Because it is nationalistic. You're a racial minority in another country, and integration isn't really that simple. I'm somebody who speaks English fluently. I rave. I know electronic music. I know my pop culture. Yet when I was in the US, I was much more comfortable with other people who could speak Urdu, Hindi, and were brown-skinned. That's just a reality of the world. So when these people go there, there's a nationalistic tendency to gravitate towards groups that sound similar, that look similar. And these are unfortunately quite conservative. And their conservatism, although gets a backlash from Christian white conservatism, there are common grounds that they coalesce on, and homophobia and transphobia, at the very least, is one of them. That is the one common ground between white nationalists and white supremacists and Christian fundamentalists and Muslim fundamentalists. And when they come back home, that is the idea that they import back. So, for instance, I am much more likely to face transphobia from somebody in Pakistan who has lived in the West compared to somebody who has been in Pakistan their entire life. So the UK experience and the Pakistan experience, there are going to be exceptions, but the two of them aren't really isolated, because the two of them are connected with what we call the diaspora. And the diaspora has been the one factor that we have all been ignoring in the global and the transnational transport of hatred and phobias. I think that is the one core population that has carried fundamentalism from the western part of the world onto the eastern part of the world. And not just that, with that, they've carried Western rhetoric of transphobia on our part of the world. It is almost a repeat of what happened in 1857 under the British occupying territories of South Asia.
Interesting you mentioned the diaspora, because actually now I'm thinking about my own experiences growing up in the UK as an immigrant. I was, as I mentioned when we first spoke, I was born in Pakistan. I was born in Lahore, but then my family moved to the UK. And actually, I think you hit the nail on the head there. Like, I used to get called all sorts of things. I used to get called mango, Pendu, all of these kind of racist terms that their
mango.
A mango is basically a person from Pakistan or India or Bangladesh who has been imported into the UK, because we import mangoes.
It's such a cool name. Mangoes are delicious. I would take that as a compliment.
I would take it now for sure, but like at the time, it was a way to those brown kids from the Pakistani brown kids, the Pakistani-born brown kids. There's British Pakistanis, so they were higher socially than Pakistani-born Pakistanis. Yeah?
Ew.
And then obviously the master is the white, right?
Oh, okay.
So, these BBCDs, British Born Confused Daisies, as we used to say in the 90s. I'm a bit older. I'm showing my age. What's it called? They were experiencing this internalized racism and the rhetorics that they would use were the things that their grandparents, their parents would have experienced, and then they were doing it to us. So yeah, I think that would coincide with probably transphobia and homophobia as well. Because again, I don't really see it as much in Pakistan. I mean, I know it exists, of course it does, and it exists politically. I've not been exposed to it maybe in the way that I would have been if I was growing up there.
I mean, I live in the northern part of Pakistan. I won't call it conservative. I will call it traditional. Because I don't think it's a conscious choice. Conservatism is simultaneously anti-liberalism. Our parts of the world aren't necessarily anti-liberal. They're just traditional. They just know their own ways, and that's how we've been. And I live here with mom and dad. I function in this city openly. I function in this country openly. I travel where I want to travel, etc. And every single time I have to travel, and I have to travel to the UK, I think, in about 3 weeks now, and that's giving me anxiety. Every single time I'm traveling to the West, I'm automatically thinking about, okay, but damn, I'm going as a Muslim trans woman. What's going to happen at immigration? What's going to happen elsewhere? And nothing ever really happens, in all honesty. This is just perceptual. This is perceived. But the fact that
I completely get it. I mean, that would be the same thing for myself. Now I'm going to the US, and then I just have a transit, and I'm thinking, what's going to happen? Are they going to let me on am I going to miss my connection? It's a 2-hour delay. Am I going to miss my connection? Because that's
particularly when it comes to identity documents, right? Because now we are living under the global rules where passports have to carry your sex assigned at birth and not the gender that you're living as, or even that is so false in itself, because it says that sex is immutable when we all know that sex is not immutable. Sex is a complete set, a set that contains your genetic sex and your genital sex and your endocrinological sex. It's all of those. And if one of them is immutable, at least the other two are definitely mutable. But regardless of that, it still carries your sex assigned at birth on documents. So you are a little apprehensive about what is the treatment that you're going to get from state authorities in these countries, given the fact that these states are now transphobic versus Pakistan, where the state is not transphobic, where the state does try to protect and preserve. And it is just one subset of society that really went out of its way, used a multi-million-dollar industry on its back to push a message and a rhetoric that isn't even real. The right-wing messaging in Pakistan would have been absolutely real and functional if this was happening in Nebraska or Arkansas or Mississippi in the US or even in the UK, because these are all the talking points that they had. Case in point, trans women and women's bathrooms. We don't have that in Pakistan because Pakistan's law specifies that public institutions are going to have a third bathroom for people with disabilities, for anybody who wants privacy, and particularly for trans people, regardless of what gender trans people identify as. They talk about trans women in sports. Trans people never really push for trans women in sports. They talk about trans women in women's only spaces. Pakistani law doesn't specify that. It clearly demarcates and states that trans women are a historically protected population. They have historically been done wrongs to, and the state needs to go out of its way to create quotas for trans individuals and to include them in public life so that their lives can be improved and they can become citizens of the country. It wasn't that rhetoric that is being talked about in the West. So it's insane how a rhetoric that isn't even reflective of the reality of the Pakistani society was used. So to summarize, you see, a lot of the times we see conservative people saying that the excesses of gender ideology, the excesses of the transgender rights movement is what is resulting in the backlash. And for the sake of argument, if I agree with it, and although I do partially agree with it somewhere, even if I do agree with it, that was not the case in Pakistan. We steered clear of those excesses because we could sense that this could result in problems, and yet the same rhetoric was applied on us. So that is what has been the most frustrating, that why? Why is this even happening? Now, is this just political point scoring? Are you seeing something happen with your right-wing brothers on another side of the world, and you think this is brilliant strategy that you can emulate and replicate in Pakistan? Or do you just hate us? Or are you stupid? Which one is it?
I mean, I think it's a combination of all three, isn't it? I mean, and one of the things I noticed is that in Pakistan, there are the likes of J.K. Rowling, female women of a particular class who have taken it upon themselves to attack the trans community.
Specifically me.
I wasn't going to go there, but yes, particularly you. There is I forget her name now, a very famous woman. She's a designer, if I understood correctly, right? Sorry, I've blanked out. I've forgotten her name. But anyway, the point with the J.K. Rowling reference is to almost show. I mean, there was this one really good analysis of this that I saw, which basically said that white women, from upper class societies, very well-to-do women who've made their millions, they will never become the best the Jeff Bezos. They will never become the Elon Musks. So to stand out, they have to find something that they can fight for. And the J.K. Rowlings of the world have found trans women to be that hill that they want to die on. Come rain or fall, that will be the thing that they will be known for, which I think is what a lot of women from upper class societies, the upper echelons of societies in countries like Pakistan are doing now. What do you think?
Yeah. I think that they truly believe what they're saying. And I think there is definitely an element of female competitiveness over here as well. At the end of the day, they see trans women as men. And let's not fault any of these ideologies. Trans women do have a male experience. I have a male experience. And I don't just have a male experience in terms of the fact that I used to have short hair and I was put in an all-boys school because there is no other place for an individual like me to be put in. I also have male experience because I was given testosterone therapy. I have been through what we call conversion therapy. And I've tried to convince myself that I'm a man and I've tried to live my life as a man. So I do have male experience. There is absolutely no denying that. But these women they've internalized that idea so much that they believe that trans women are women with an edge. So if trans women are women, then these are women with a masculine edge, and hence we are inherently inferior to them biologically. And because we are inferior to them biologically, we are inferior to them in capacity. And if they come in, they will steal all our rights, they'll steal all our jobs, which is so far from the truth. Because if you look at the mean literacy level of cis women and you compare that with the mean literacy level of trans women, there's a massive gap. You look at income, the mean income of trans women versus the mean income of cis women, particularly in asset holdings, and there is a massive disparity. Cis women are doing much better than trans women are doing. Then you come and you look at health, for instance, HIV, infectious diseases, the age at which people are dying. Once again, cis women are doing much better than trans women. And lastly, when you come and you look at violence, the rates of violence committed on women, and you do a bifurcated set, you look at trans women and cis women separately, cis women are doing much better compared to trans women, not just in terms of the number of violent acts committed, but on the quality of violence, because the violence that is being committed on trans women is dramatic. You will have one cis woman murdered, and rightfully so, the entire world and the entire country will be up in arms that, oh my God, this is a case of femicide, a woman has been murdered. And you will have weekly cases of trans women being stripped naked, raped with objects, heads shaved, body parts sliced off while they're alive, arms broken, legs broken, all being videotaped, then slowly cut so that she slowly bleeds to death out in a public space, videotaped, recorded, posted, and there will never be an outcry. So that is what it is. I think this idea of positing trans women as men gives conservative cis women and transphobic cis women a blanket, a veneer to delegitimize and to dehumanize, and to really reduce the volume on the scale of violence, economic, social, physical, that trans women are facing. And I think it's an addiction to victimhood. It's how modern femininity, and this is a problem with feminism, this is homework that feminism needs to do. The contemporary idea of womanhood is simultaneously a woman who is empowered and a victim. She can break the glass ceiling, but oh wow, the fact that we are talking about her breaking the glass ceiling means that she's really struggling. She's really coming from somewhere. And white rich women in the West and elite privileged women in the global South really haven't had those victim complexes or those struggles. They've had everything handed out to them on a silver platter and a silver spoon. So finally be able to claim victimhood through your gender identity is so empowering in a way. And it's such a good catapult for your brand identity that they want to do that. And the only other woman who is a victim is either the poor woman, which she does not want to be, so she will never claim that, or it is the trans woman who is a man. So, oh wow, let's start attacking her. Because access to female victimhood, access to womanly harm, is a capital that only these particular cis women want to preserve for themselves.
With that in mind, I mean, firstly, I think what you said is so incredibly powerful, and I don't think people realize the atrocities that the trans community faces in the way that you've described it. I mean, I remember reading a report on the homicide rates of trans people, and often people talk about that this would be incredibly high in countries like Pakistan and India, Afghanistan, etc. And actually, people don't even imagine that it would be a place like Brazil, which has some of the highest rates of homicide to trans people. But with that in mind, then, thinking about how trans people, and not just trans women, trans people generally, so even including trans men, the impact of this rhetoric, the impact of these discriminations in Pakistan, the impact it has on mental health. We know that mental health in Pakistan is poor. I think there's about 400 to 500 psychiatrists for the entire country. How difficult is it? And I guess it is difficult, but how difficult is it to seek support, whether it's medical, whether it's psychological, whether it's psychiatric, in Pakistan? And, could you talk about your own experience? You mentioned conversion therapy, and there's various forms of conversion therapy. Yours is one. I mean, one of the ones I experienced was my mother throwing, what's it called, water on me, Zamzam water on me, and trying to do an exorcism. So that's some of the conversion therapy I've experienced, as a brown Muslim person. But would you shed some light on that?
Yes, I think before we get into the access aspect of it, I just want to talk about how communities cope with challenges when they are faced with challenges repeatedly over multiple decades. Of course, I'm getting into intergenerational and transgenerational trauma, but I'm also just talking about how communities cope with things generally. And we know in Pakistan, trans women have an incredible coping mechanism, and coping mechanism in the face of abject harm is bad. Those coping mechanisms themselves is harm deflection in one way or the other. So what you see is desensitization. That is the foreground. That is the main heading under which everything exists. And then there are specific challenges that the trans community experiences and faces, as a result of which we have communally developed habits and practices that I think are contrary to any good well-being science. We have some of the highest rates of substance abuse in the country, extremely high rates of substance abuse. I have seen girls in my life that I saw and I went, she is going to be the next superstar of this country. Incredible talent, incredible brain, gorgeous, beyond explanation. And 3 years later, you're asking a friend, Yaar, tumhe wo yaad hai bandi? Do you remember that girl? Where is she now? She must be doing incredible, right? Where is she? And she's like, oh, she died on the train tracks because she was using meth uncontrollably for the past 3 years. So whenever somebody asks me what is the biggest mental health, and this is the epidemiologist in me coming out right now, what is the biggest mental health challenge that trans women face? And I will say substance use. And I am one of those progressive individuals and progressive clinicians who do draw a line between recreational use, abuse, and addiction. And I'm quite aware of that. So this is not me demonizing recreational use at all, but the way substances are being used in the community to numb pain, the commonest profession is dancing and begging. And every single time a trans woman goes out to beg, she is using Activism, which is an anti-allergic, or she drinks a bottle of cough syrup. And if she gets her hand on numbing or downers like opioids or heroin, she is going to use that. Then we have dancers who are using all sort of inebriating agents. And I think that is where the biggest burden of mental health care comes from. So when it comes to access, now what access are we talking about? Are we talking about access to substance use? Because we do have rehab centers in Pakistan with quite abhorrent and unscientific practices like aggression, like locking people in, like shaving people's heads. And these are practices that are used for cisgender men. And Pakistan is a very gendered country. So practices that you're using for cisgender men are practices that you then extrapolate onto transgender women. It's not going to yield the same results. So, okay, step number 2, I'm coming to gender affirming or trans friendly rehabilitative practices. And I don't think any of those exist. They don't exist in terms of the service delivery on the supply side, and they don't exist on the demand side. The trans community isn't demanding any gender affirming mental health services either, because they're, like I said, it's a coping mechanism. And what are coping mechanisms? Coping mechanisms help you cope. So you're just coping. That's where you are. And then lastly, there's a narrative that is baked on these coping practices. And that narrative is so convincing that these drugs help you lose weight. And of course, losing weight is good because everybody has body dysmorphia. Bingo, right? Eureka, trans women and dysmorphia. Wow, who would have thought about that? So it's a dystopian sort of complex that is created within itself. So there is a lot of occupational harm, as I like to call it. You are using because of the occupations that you're in. Then you are using because of the narratives that the community has constructed around using. And then there is straight up absence of trans affirming services when it comes to mental health. And this is where we are.
And I guess it's no wonder that we then end up on a track.
There you go.
Right? Because I think you said it just now. What is it other than coping? I always say if you're not coping, then you're dead.
There you go.
So either you're coping or you're dead. And the coping could be coping really well or coping really badly, but you're still coping. And anything less than that, well, then you're dead.
Yeah. And if you cope too bad, then you're dead again.
Yeah. So with that in mind, I guess one of your copings, this will be the last question before we finish, is your satire, is your writing. At least that's what it feels like. And I imagine it probably started off like that. What role does it play now? If not coping, if something else?
I think what it does is, I think my coping is also, it works in terms of what we call narrative change and narrative work. You might remember Iqbal ka ek sher hai. Iqbal is the national poet of Pakistan. Dil se jo baat nikalti hai, asar rakhti hai, par nahi taakat-e parwaaz magar rakhti hai. Something that comes out of the heart always has an impact, and even if it does not have wings, it still has the power to fly. And I think that's what really happens. You can't combat emotions with logic. Emotions require emotions, feelings require feelings. There is an affect to the work that we do, and that affect needs to be centered and brought out forth. And the interventions that we talk about also need to be rooted in realism as well as affect simultaneously. So my coping is about doing. I act out. I really try to take charge of a situation and take action while understanding what my limits and boundaries are in terms of taking this action. So one of the things that we want to do is establish the Phoenix Fund. The Phoenix Fund is for trans people in distress, trans women particularly, and trans girls in particular. And what we want to do is we want to take care of their rent and their university fees 100%, while also linking them up with affirming therapists and take 80 to 90% of those costs while giving you a monthly stipend. And if this program is successful for the next 15 to 20 years, I think we would have transformed the material conditions of upcoming and young trans kids and hence their lives. And that is it. I do not want any flags or any slogans or this or that. Let's just start working on changing the material conditions of trans and queer people. That's what we require.
Mehrub, that is an amazing, amazing venture that you're going on, and I wish you and your community all the best for that. And thank you so much for joining us today. So with that, thank you for anyone listening. This is Queer Talk. Queer Talk is a podcast by Fighting Fear. Fighting Fear is a community for queer people by queer people. You can find out more about us on our website, fightingfear.co.uk, and you can follow us on all major social media platforms, Fighting Fear Community. Once again, Mehrub, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Saqib. And please be my guest whenever you're in Pakistan next.
For sure. Thank you so much.